Hello, y'all. It's been a minute since I've dropped a new episode, and I figured in my usual kind of manner, I have so many updates for you all, but I thought it was the most appropriate to start with an episode of something that I'm living right now. When I shared about it the other day in Close Friends, I was one of the things that I had never gotten this many replies before, and I figured, what I'm working through is a universal human experience, and that is how we make big, huge identity shifting decisions. Granted, not everybody makes such big decisions, but if you're listening to this podcast and you are a cycle breaker or moneymaker, it means that you have committed to building something bigger than your current reality, something bigger than yourself, whether that is just you having a deep reason for why you create content. But everyone here has a brand or desires to build a brand that is for something, whether it's for your career, whether it's for a business, or whether it's just for being an influence in a way that you want to be an influence. This is going to require all of you to stretch and to expand and to be uncomfortable and to stretch into new versions of yourself a lot faster than the average person who kind of just strives to seek stability and repeat that stability and maybe just get a raise at work and just carry on about their life, which is totally fine, but that's typically not the person that listens to this podcast. And so in this episode, I want to share, especially for anybody listening who is in a season that they feel like there is something more, either something more for them, or they feel like they've outgrown something, or they need to end something. Sometimes this is ending a relationship, whether or not they should keep trying to have a baby, whether they should move, whether they should quit their job and go full time on their business, whether they change career paths, big things that really open up and really almost like, I kind of look at it like there is a train and it is on a track. And if nothing interjects with that train, it's going to end at a certain station. Now, sometimes we make decisions to say, I'm going to put a little split in that path where we can either go the path or we can veer off to the right. And that comes in the form of these decisions that I'm going to talk to you about in this episode. I want to share some of those big decisions that I've made, because even if you aren't contemplating that same decision, it's going to help you as far as the reflection questions that I asked myself at those times to basically become a very unrecognizable version of myself. It isn't just my life circumstances that are completely unrecognizable from, let's say, 14 years ago, really, I would say when I kind of first started changing my life, but myself, like my personality, the way that I think, everything about me is completely different now. And we get to reinvent ourselves in this lifetime. We get to decide what the next chapter of our life is like. We get to decide to live one chapter at a time. So that's what I want to share with you in this episode is what some of those big decisions have been. And if you are sitting in a really big decision, whether it's a beginning, whether it's an ending, or something in between, this episode is going to help you, because I'm someone who has done not their fair share, but probably more than most people I know. And if you don't know that, you'll know that by the end of this episode. So I'm going to give you reflection questions, emotions to sit in your body, questions to ask yourself in order for you to get clear on what is this next decision. Is there a decision? Is there a non-decision? Is there something to feel? What is that? So that you can step towards what this next chapter of your life is calling you to do and be. So that being said, some big decisions that I have made throughout my life, I'd say I really don't count those things until 2012. The reason for this is because everything before 2012 was I was the train that was on the track. That it's very expected, right? Like I went to college, I got my master's degree, I married my high school sweetheart, we bought a house, and I did all of the things that you would expect. What happened in 2012 was I realized I was in a toxic relationship. My husband was cheating on me all the time and gaslighting me about it. I was in a job where I didn't want my boss's job, and I just kind of questioned everything. So I started one by one, really, starting to make different decisions, walking away from the marriage. We had been married for 2 years, together for 13. Deciding to move to a new city, deciding to quit my job without another job, like not quitting my job for another job, but quitting my job to solo travel and get a one-way flight to London. So these are all things that I've done. I've done more than this, but I want to kind of walk you through like, what are some of the questions that I ask myself in each of those stages? Because what actually happens is you develop a skill for decision making, but not just decision making. What you can do as a human in this lifetime is become attuned to the skill of identity shifting decisions, meaning what is the guidance that I am getting in terms of what it is that I need to do. And if you're going to do really big things in this life, things that are delusional, things that make absolutely no sense, things that would scare other people into staying put, this is what you're going to need to do, because I've done insane, ridiculous things that made absolutely no sense, and I've not regretted any of them. And there's no way that I would have a well over $1 million business as a single mother, be the person that I am, to have the influence that I have. I'll walk you kind of through what I've realized. Number one is that you are always clear on what you don't want, generally before you are clear what you do want. And that is important. A lot of people stop there and say, well, I know that I don't want this anymore. I don't want to feel this way. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this, but I don't know what I want. And they will stop there and just not go forward because they don't know what they want. Really what happens at this stage is that the what you no longer want is it's data, it's information, right? So you really want to look at like, okay, what is clear, because that's already guidance. And then what would you need to do in order for you to make what you don't want a decision, right? So for example, for me right now, I'm sitting in the decision of leaving San Francisco, right? So that's what sparked this episode. I am moving out of San Francisco, and I knew this a year and a half ago, but I didn't want to commit to I'm leaving San Francisco because I kept saying, well, I don't know where I'm going to move. Not knowing where you're going to move doesn't have anything to do with the fact that I knew that I needed to leave San Francisco, but I postponed it. I held it back. Why? Because I had guilt over my daughter and the fact that she loves her school and her friends, and my parents are here and they're retired and they pick her up from school every day, and they don't really have like, just like their life is being parents and grandparents, right? And I felt really guilty. And so I avoided the decision. The fact that I knew that I didn't want to be in San Francisco anymore was a decision. So when we don't treat it like a decision and we hold all these other things on top of it, we just like don't move forward, and we will just keep coming back. So what you no longer want is information. How can you commit to what you no longer want and make that and say that is a decision? And if that hasn't changed in several months, this isn't like, oh, I had a bad day, I don't want to do this, whatever. That's a decision. So that's one thing. Then if that was a decision, then what would you allow to be on the table that you aren't currently, because you're hinging everything on the fact that you need to have all the steps outlined, because you won't. The other thing I will say is that this is equivalent to if you take step 1, step 2 and 3 will become clearer. And sometimes we're asking ourselves to see too many steps ahead, and then we don't even take step 1. And many of the times, big, brave decisions feel like stepping on stones in the fog. So we can't see stone number 10, but we can see stone number 1 and maybe number 2. Now, if you step on stone number 1 and number 2, then 3 and 4 become clear because they're right there in your vision. And many times we are afraid to take that first step. We wait and think we need to have all the clarity, or we see the fact that we can't see stones 3 and 4 as a threat, as a sign that we shouldn't do it. But in reality, stones 3 and 4 are never going to become visible to you if you don't step on stone number 1. And sometimes stone number 1 is, I know what I don't want, and I need to commit to what I don't want. And then I need to figure out what comes after that. So that's first. That's actually how I decided to leave a 13-year relationship. That's actually how I decided, in this case, I'm leaving San Francisco. I still to this day don't exactly know where we're going to live. I'm exploring some options, but the options have become a lot clearer ever since deciding I was going to leave San Francisco. Granted, it became easier because I kind of prayed like, oh, I wish the decision to leave San Francisco was easier. Literally immediately got an email from my landlord saying my rent was going up by another $1,000. Okay. That's normal in San Francisco. The rent's going up by another $1,000. And I was like, thank you, universe. I was saying, I wish the decision of whether to leave San Francisco was easier. I already knew what I wanted to do. I just felt guilty about it. And that's different. So, which leads me to start to notice when staying put in indecision, it becomes more uncomfortable. It will feel a little bit like a tea kettle that has a bunch of pressure, and it starts to become like inaction becomes hard. And start to notice as well, when do synchronicities start to happen to make the decision you actually want to make easier, more likely? It keeps showing up. Maybe like that whisper becomes a nudge, becomes a push, that thing that you want to do. It keeps presenting itself. And so what happens is staying put becomes hard. Moving actually feels like relief. Okay. It's so funny. This makes me think about when I was pregnant with my daughter and I was giving birth, and I was so scared to push. And I was afraid it was going to hurt. And I remember someone saying, no, pushing feels like relief. It's the contractions. Like when you want to push and you can't because you're not dilated, like that hurts. And that's actually what happens when you've outgrown an identity, is that it hurts to stay. It starts to feel so uncomfortable. The desire, the desire to leave or to change or to make that decision becomes like you can't stop thinking about it, and then it becomes so hard for you to stay or to stay put, essentially. And that's what I found time and time and time again. Like you will start to notice synchronicities. And then you may start to notice that desire becomes a whisper and then a nudge and then a push. Like you like can't ignore it anymore. It gets louder and louder and louder. That is signals. That is data. That is sometimes your higher self. Sometimes it's your elders that are guiding you. It's just your intuition, and you are being protected. If you believe in a higher power, you can say it's God. There's guidance. There's guidance there. And then what happens with that sometimes is grief comes up. Grief about leaving a career that you used to identify yourself by. Grief over leaving a relationship, leaving a job that you used to define yourself by. It might mean moving and feeling extremely guilty about it. It might mean just something that makes you feel sadness or fear. And sometimes what happens is, because we don't want to feel those emotions, we will over-index on having more information, doing more research, waiting for a better time. But what you're actually doing is avoiding feeling feelings about the decision you already know you want to make. Okay? So that was for sure for me, because when I decided that I wanted to move out of San Francisco, I felt a lot of grief about it. I felt the guilt about, quote unquote, taking my daughter away from my parents and out of her school. When I decided to, leave my marriage 14 years ago, there was grief around all of the years of my life that I had spent, in this relationship. There was grief around that. And sometimes we are avoiding feeling the grief and we postpone it, not because we don't know, but because we don't want to feel the feeling. So the question to ask yourself if you're here is, what would it look like to accept this as an outcome and just almost make the decision in your mind? You don't need to say it out loud, but just try it on. And what comes up, try it on and feel it. So it's almost like, okay, imagine yourself making it, imagine the sadness, imagine that it's done. You just haven't spoken it out loud, and see what happens. Because sometimes if you cry about it, if you sit with the guilt, you do whatever, you'll actually realize like, this is actually what I want to do. I just had emotions about it, right? And one thing that I know now is that when we are overthinking, we are typically underfeeling. When we are overthinking, we are typically underfeeling. Feeling grief, feeling anger, feeling fear. And that the willingness to sit in that and to try that on is going to bring you so much clarity. Okay. So here are some more specific questions that I have asked myself, particularly if you're sitting in a decision where you are considering what other people think or what other people want, or even what a past version of you would want. And also questions to ask yourself if you feel like you have outgrown a previous identity. And now you need to ask yourself different questions. So question number 1, if I couldn't disappoint anyone, what would I do? And if I didn't need to explain myself, what would I do? Number 2, if it was all going to work out, what would I want to work out? Okay. Because sometimes we don't even want to allow ourselves to have the option because we don't think it's going to work out, or we're afraid, or we don't have the answers and we don't do it. Let yourself have what you want. At least try. So many times we don't even try because we say, well, I don't see any examples around me. And like, I just don't think that could work. And we just don't even do it. But like, delusional things never seem like they make sense. That's why they're delusional. So if it was all going to work out, what would I want to work out? Another thing that I would say, and this has come up for, especially if you're in business because you're expanding all the time. And this is part of how I have made the decision to move so many times. For you, it may not be moving. For me, it just has been, because I've been stabilizing myself again as a single mother, starting again from zero, being on food stamps 10 years ago, post-divorce, being a single parent, having to rebuild my savings, all the things. Like, I've had no choice unless I want to stay put. For me, there was no choice. I have to keep expanding. So a question that I would ask myself is, what's important to me now versus before? Because before it may have been, I need to save money and I want to, whatever. And now it might be, now I want to be in an expansive environment. I want to feel connected. I want to feel, this and that. It could be, now what's important for me is a slower pace of life, or I want a simpler business, or I want more spaciousness. Or now what's more important is depth. I really want to be able to go deep with my clients. Or now what's important is, I want whatever that is, like what's important to me now versus before. And are there any decisions that you need to make in order to honor what is important to you now versus before? And this is where there's no right or wrong answer. This is where one person can have a certain business model, another person can have a different way of marketing, another person can have different offers, and you're always allowed to change your mind. And that's okay. We don't want to blow up our life and our business all the time, but I do think that the mistake that many of us make more often is staying stuck for too long, not changing everything all the time. I think especially if you are a woman of color and daughter of immigrants, like we are very good at making things work to the extent that like we make things work that we actually need to change. So what's important to me now versus before? And here's another question. This is actually the question that I asked myself for this move. And we may potentially be moving out of the country. And this is the question. Who do I need to become in this next chapter? And what environment and circumstances support that? I tend to go environment over actions because environment makes the actions easier. So the question is, who do I need to become in this next chapter? And what environment or decisions are going to support that? So I'll tell you a little bit about how I thought about this for my move, because again, this could look different for you. So I've lived in San Francisco for 4 years. I was born and raised here. I have moved and come back many times. Every time I've come back, it has been for regaining stability. Either because I've been divorced twice. I moved back to my parents' house, for example, after my divorce. I moved back. No, I didn't actually. I moved back lots of different times. But all of the other times it was like to rebuild. This time I moved back because I wanted to be close to my parents, and I did want some stability. I wanted to be close to them. My daughter had just turned 5. She was going to elementary school, and I decided to move back. And San Francisco reflected that proximity to family and familiarity, right? But now I have grown my business. I now have all of the offers that I've always wanted to have. I've just had the biggest quarter I've ever had in terms of number of clients. I've signed 33 in Q1. I've shifted the way that I think about business. I have more that I'm thinking about, and I have felt like this just isn't where I want to be. It feels like there's a lot of pressure. It feels like I just feel really disconnected to this land, even though I have my sisters and my parents here. It is super expensive. It's the most expensive city in the United States. And I just think like I've made it work here. I've created a life that really looks good on paper. I mean, my condo is beautiful. I have a panoramic view of San Francisco. I drive a Tesla. I unfortunately bought it years ago before Elon Musk, became visibly Elon Musk. Like he always has been this person, but whatever. This is just before I realized all the things. So I'm going to be selling this car possibly. But I really thought like I want a feeling of like a culture of community where I live, where people say hello and it's warm and you can chat with people on the street. That's not San Francisco. I want a lower cost of living. I want a slower pace of life. I want proximity to my culture, to Latino culture. We kind of have that in certain areas of San Francisco, but it's much less diverse than before. I want third spaces, meaning you go out and there's people just hanging out in the street and connected. I want a city that feels like it's more for families. San Francisco is not that. I want to be able to take my revenue and instead of pumping it into more rent, I want to put it into my 401k, to my diversified portfolio. And my daughters as well. So now my definition of success is being able to put more money towards my investments rather than a life that just looks good on paper. Granted, can we always make more money? Yes. But I've found I'm like, you know what? It's going to be real hard because I've been trying and I've keep hitting multiple six figures, and that's great. But here it takes multiple six figures to just like live a normal life, right? That if I want to make more money, I actually have to reduce my dependency on making more money. Like right now, I have to make a lot of money just to exist in this city, to have my team, to do all the things. And I'm like, I have to have more space, more groundedness, more support. And granted, I have support with my parents, but I feel like it's just different where I'm going to go. And those are the questions that I'm sitting in now. That's who I need to become, is well rested, supported, grounded, connected. I want sun. I want all these things that I said, and it's not here. And that's the questions that I've been sitting in. So I'm going to go back and revisit what some of the questions were that I shared with you guys, because so many times, like, there's emotions, there's a feeling of like resisting changing when you don't know what all the next steps are going to be. And I think that it keeps us stuck for a lot longer than we really realize sometimes. And it's never going to feel easy. You're never going to feel fully ready. If you knew all the steps of what it was going to be like, it wouldn't be like a growth move. It wouldn't be like an identity shift. It's almost like you have subscribed to a life where you are a plant and that plant is growing so rapidly that it needs to be put in a new pot. When you refuse to put it in a new pot, either the plant stops growing or the roots start to wrap around themselves. And that is a lot of what happens is you say that you want something, you start to take the steps towards it, and then you expect the next steps to always feel fun and exciting, and they don't. Sometimes they're terrifying. Sometimes they require you to say no to something, and it feels like it's being ripped out of your hands because you're just like, no, I don't know, but this is my security, or this is what I've always done. And it doesn't always feel like that. Like growth feels really scary and it feels uncertain, and you are going to have to take a leap to some degree. You are going to have to step on stone number 1 and 2 in order to see 3 and 4 and so on. And it will become easier. And what happens is you shift from relying on certainty and planning to trusting yourself, problem solving, figuring it out, making decisions from an intuitive place, not just a logical place. And resilience, meaning, is everything going to always work out exactly how you thought? No, but you can figure it out, and you will. And when you believe that and you know that there's really nothing that you can decide that isn't the end of the world. I think, granted, one thing you can ask yourself about the question, the decision that you're sitting in, is what if it doesn't work out? Like, what's the reverse of this decision? Because sometimes the reverse is exactly where you are now. So things like quitting your job, you can get another job. Something that is maybe not reversible would be like, if you're not sure you want a divorce, you maybe don't want to say you want a divorce if you're not sure. Granted, you want to look at that, but I just think that it's not ever going to feel certain. Am I certain about leaving San Francisco? I'm pretty certain about leaving San Francisco, but am I certain about where we're going to move and that that's the best place? No. But one thing that has really helped me too is, especially when you're growing rapidly, especially when you have picked a path that causes you to have to expand into a bigger pot regularly, is to allow yourself to live life by chapters, not feeling like you have to have the whole book written, because some people do. Some people want a predictable book where they know exactly what's going to happen and that path is laid out for them. And they just want everything, to kind of happen according to that path. If you've grown a business, if you have a brand, if you're creating content, if you are expanding, and you're a trailblazer, you are a cycle breaker, it's okay for you to make decisions one chapter at a time. And this is something that almost stopped me from my move, because no city felt like I could see myself for years there. San Francisco, I did, only because I know exactly what to expect here. So when I said yes to San Francisco, I was like, oh yeah, maybe I'll stay there for a few years, or maybe I'll stay until she graduates from 5th grade. That's not going to happen at this point. But what happens is that sometimes the next chapter is the equivalent of stone 1 and 2, so that you can see 3 and 4. So it is okay for you to live one chapter at a time. And I think that when you've been brought up to look at like a career path, a life path, getting married, going to college, climbing the ladder, and all these things, a chapter can feel almost like a failure, almost like, oh, well, if I don't stick with this, then there's something wrong with me. Or if this chapter doesn't quote unquote work out, then like that, I messed up, or that you're constantly changing your mind. But the thing is that you grow so much faster that way. And that chapter makes you become someone that you wouldn't have otherwise. And that's what I've noticed. I've lived in different places. I've had an era where I was, like I said, corporate girly. Then I was solo traveler across Europe for a year. Then I was UK expat living in London with my daughter's dad. Then I was a startup co-founder when I was in London, and I started a dating app with a friend of mine, and I was also a marketing director. And then there was the era of me being pregnant, my husband leaving, and me having to start over financially. And it was a healing era, essentially. And then it was my era where I decided I wasn't going to come back to corporate, and that I was going to start something of my own. I didn't know what it was going to be, but I said no to a job offer before I knew what I was going to say yes to. But I knew that I was saying no to corporate before I knew that I was saying yes to something else. I just knew that I was saying yes to entrepreneurship. I just didn't know the offer or what it was going to look like. But if I expected myself to know, I would have said yes to the job, and I probably wouldn't have started the business, because I would have been so wrapped up in another super high profile, like high demand, super stressful job. And so I just said no. And then I said, I don't know what yes is, but I know yes is to working for myself. I will figure it out. Then came my entrepreneurship era. I started creating my personal brand, building a brand around my story. In 2019, I started doing collaborations, growing an audience around my brand. And then when I made the decision of hiring a coach and deciding what my offer was, that's when my first 6-figure year happened. I had an audience of people that were waiting to work with me because I had built that trust. And then I had an era of moving to Portland to reduce my cost of living so that I could expand my business. And that's what I did. I doubled the size of my business. I went from a 6-figure year to 150K to 333 to 350. And then I came back to San Francisco and it was kind of like a grounding, like, okay, I grew my business. Now my daughter's in school. Like, what does this look like for me to solidify this success? And then I burnt out. And then it was my burnout era. And then it made me realize, okay, I have a lot of attachments to my business. My ego is attached to this business. Like, how can I separate who I am from this business? That was necessary. It showed me everything that was unsustainable about my business. Ever since I came out of burnout last summer, I have been going in and fixing and refining so that my business doesn't require so much of like my individual output for every single thing. Like, I have more systems. I have a launch system. I have better systems for serving my clients. So like all of these things were necessary. And then now is my TBD era. I don't know if we're probably leaving the country, you guys. I'm in the middle of it. I'm doing a lot of research, but to be honest, like the day that I got the letter from my landlord, like officially, they have to send you a letter where you have to sign for it, with the latest $1,000 rent increase. I sobbed because I knew that leaving was what I wanted, but now I kind of had like a reason to be like, oh, the universe wants me to leave. I want to leave, but now the universe is kind of kicking me out. It was like a whisper to a nudge to a push. And then it was like I got kicked and it was like, you gotta go. So I cried because I was like, man, this is my hometown. I feel like I did really well at creating what looks like a two-parent, two-income household on one income. I'm surrounded by people with tech salaries. The average like two-parent home in San Francisco makes between like $315,000 and $400,000. I live in an area where there's no units under $6,000. I have just this beautiful looking life, but it just doesn't match what I want. And I'm sitting in a lot of grief. I'm talking to my parents about this move. They're sad. They don't want me to go. I feel bad, but I know that I have to go. And this is what growth feels like. It doesn't feel comfortable and easy and good. In fact, the opposite of that. And this is why so few people do it. Okay. I hope this episode was helpful. These questions and this reflection has come from quite literally 14 years of me doing things that look batshit insane, but have actually allowed me to completely reinvent my life to what I have now. Me as a person, my living situation, my business, the brand that I have, the mom that I am, the friend that I am, the daughter that I am, all the things. And all of this is, if it were easy, more people would do it. But you know what? That's why you're listening to this podcast, because you are that person who is signing themselves up for discomfort in order to have that growth and that impact that they desire. So I hope this was helpful. And if you are in an era where you are sitting in some of these bigger decisions, whether they are in your personal life or in your business, I would love to support you as your coach. As of right now, at least for the next couple months, I have about 2 one-on-one spots or so. I have someone that's ending this month, so we can start in May. And this is what we hold space for. I've helped so many people with completely changing their lives. Like some of my clients, if I look at their life right now, it's like they're completely unrecognizable. Other ones, it's just more minor shifts, right? They just become more of who they want to be, a business that reflects that, and the identity to support it. So if this is something that you are thinking about in terms of support, send me a DM on Instagram. You also can schedule a discovery call with me on my website under the private coaching page. But my DMs are always open. You always can chat with me and be like, look, Mariela, here's where I'm at. Here's what I'm thinking. I have different ways of working with clients. And I can kind of suggest like, okay, you know what? Here's what I'm hearing. There's never any pressure, but I would love to hear from you because this is something that a group program and a mastermind, like I have amazing masterminds group programs, and I've had clients that I have helped in my mastermind in particular and in one-on-one coaching. But sometimes we just need kind of a private space to be able to like go back with our mentor, really air out like what's coming up for us, really help to make these decisions, and to just let ourselves have what we want versus letting fear or uncertainty or us not being able to see steps 1 through 10 stop us. Okay. So like I said, I would love to support you. I'm not always taking private clients, but I am right now. I'm in between launches. I'm reimagining what reclamation is going to look like. And just sitting in a lot of new life lessons. So it's a really good time for us to start if this is something you've been thinking about. All right. I'll see y'all in the next episode.